Hi, and welcome to Catholic Peekskill. I'm Father John Higgins, your host here, and I'm so glad you could join us. And we're going to discuss all things Catholic that are connected to our city of Peekskill. These last many weeks have seen a lot of changes and developments and a lot of good things, blessings for us at Assumption Church. We know on June 11th, we got a new deacon. Carlos Campoverde was ordained by Archbishop Timothy Dolan and had his first Mass of Thanksgiving with us, 12 noon the next day, and a joyful celebration for a whole parish. Then the news came of some change in clergy personnel. We announced that Father Louis Anderson has been assigned by Archbishop Dolan to become the new parochial vicar at the Church of St. Lucy in the Bronx. And shortly thereafter, we announced that we would be having a brand new priest with us. Well, brand new to us, but a priest of 2 years. Father Vincent Druding, though born in Illinois, grew up in Carmel, Indiana. And after living there till age 20, came to New York, had a life-changing experience on September 11th, and entered the seminary. After his ordination on May 9th, 2009, he served at Our Lady of Angels Parish in the Bronx, and now, effective as of July 1st, he comes to be with us. He's our guest tonight on Catholic Peekskill, and we're really glad you could join us, Father Vincent. Thanks so much for being with us. You're so welcome here.
Thanks.
Tell us a little about your family background, growing up in Indiana from age 6 months. Did I have that right?
That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
Tell me about your family a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'm the youngest. My parents had 6 children, and 4 boys, 2 girls. And I grew up in Carmel, Indiana, a suburb of Indianapolis on the north side, and it was really a great place to grow up. Played a lot of sports growing up, went to Catholic school for 12 years, and just a lot of big families, a lot of Catholic families, and really the life I grew up revolved around the parish. Our home parish is called Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and from sports to hanging out on the weekends, I lived right next to the church.
Is that right? Did you feel that God was calling you to the priesthood when you were a child, or did that only come later on?
In 2nd grade was the first time I felt called to be a priest. And then as I got older, about 7th and 8th grade, I visited a religious order. They had a summer camp, and I came home thinking I wanted to go back. But my parents thought it would be a little far away from home, and I agreed. So I went to high school and fell in love with a girl in high school. Amy Borgo. I thought one day maybe I might, that she'd be the one for me, but it never worked out. So, I kind of got interested in other things in the world, and went off to college.
Where was that you went to college?
Went to Wabash College,
okay.
And in Indiana, it's a private liberal arts school, all-male college, and I was a religion major in undergrad, thinking that, perhaps I should at least keep one foot in the waters of the faith, because I felt I was called pretty strongly when I was younger, but as I got into college, I strayed and fell into, partying and the way of the world, and I kind of went through a kind of intellectual and faith crisis, and started to consider other religions intellectually and philosophy, and I lost my way, and really lost my way morally, and that left me, in a position of basically lost sheep. And I had a couple scary moments where, I thought, if I died today, I'd go to hell, to be honest with you. And it wasn't till a little later that I woke up and sought out my Lord again and saw His mercy.
Wow. So you were in a period of spiritual lowness, let's say,
Yeah.
through your college years.
Yeah.
And your major in college was?
I was a religion major.
Okay.
But it wasn't Catholic school. It wasn't theology. It was to study world religions with a focus
religion,
on
not
Christianity.
any particular.
The focus on Christianity. But,
okay.
Yeah.
So what did you do after college?
I worked in Indianapolis. I worked first for a guy who was an entrepreneur, and he had some businesses in construction and land development, and just assisted him. And then I split off and started my own sole proprietorship, worked as a headhunter. I partnered with a guy who was a professional, and we helped hire people who worked for a CLEC, competitive local exchange carrier. They were back in the days when they were building all the technology companies.
Gotcha.
So we did headhunting to help build the company.
And somehow you made your way to New York. How did that happen?
When I was working, I kind of was restless and intellectually kind of stagnant, and I knew I wanted to keep studying. So I went to graduate school, went to University of Chicago, and enrolled in a humanities program and did a master's there. Before I completed it, I came out to do a summer program over in Poland. I was studying political economy and Catholic social thought, and especially the life and thought of John Paul II. And I had a profound experience there with the Dominican friars, Dominican Order friars in Poland. And the author of John Paul II's biography, George Weigel, took some of our group around on a tour of the footsteps of John Paul II. And we went to the mountains where he used to go hiking and skiing, and we were in Krakow, where he was when the Nazis occupied Krakow, and had to kind of go on the underground as a seminarian, and saw we had his first mass, and was very inspired by his life and writing, and that kind of reopened in me some of those old, I guess, the ideas of becoming a priest, and I revisited that. And meanwhile, I applied for a fellowship in public affairs with a thing called the Coro Foundation. Okay. It's not an acronym; doesn't stand for anything. It's CORO, and they have offices in 5 cities throughout the United States. And I got assigned to the one in New York.
I see.
And so,
what did you do for Coro?
It was kind of a fellowship in public affairs for young college graduates who want to go try to change the world, a little overzealous about maybe perhaps going into public life. And so I was one of 10 or 12 that got assigned to New York. And the idea was to do 5 internships and a project at the end of it, and then a group project as well. So I arrived to New York actually September 4th, 2001 for a week of orientation. And had a half day at my first assignment. I was going to be at the Department of Employment September 10th. And then September 11th was actually my first full day of work in New York. Wow.
Were you working near Ground Zero at that time?
I didn't make it in. I was supposed to, my first internship there was with the Department of Employment on Worth Street, which is just a few blocks north of Ground Zero. And so I came out of the subway across the street from the municipal building, right at City Hall, about 4 or 5 blocks away from the towers. And about a couple minutes after the first plane had gone in the tower, I emerged from the underground and saw the hole from the building, and I asked a guy what had happened, and he said a plane had gone in there. And it didn't seem plausible to me because it was a small hole. I thought maybe it was a bomb, but it entered the other side. So he said, no, take a look, and he pointed, and as he pointed, I followed his hand, and I was looking at the building as the second plane went in the second tower.
Oh my.
And I was literally watching it as the plane went in. It entered the other side. I was over here, so I didn't see it go. I just saw the explosion. And it was like a bomb had gone off at our feet. I remember running across the street. It was a chaotic scene. And I ran up to a lady who was just shrieking. And I said, what happened? And she said, I saw a plane go in there. And I didn't imagine it would have been a passenger plane. I thought it was like, I did think it was a terrorist attack, but I didn't know it was a passenger plane. The horror of, later on to see the videos of that. And then I just stood and I watched the towers burn for like 40 minutes or however long they were burning, and it was an awful scene. I saw the firefighters going in, and the people from the tower started to come to us, people jumping to their deaths, in front of us. And eventually the firefighters and the police officers came and evacuated where we were, and they said to walk west and north. So we started to walk with the others, and the first tower started to fall, and just heard like a sound over our shoulders and saw the clouds coming. And I outran the smoke. It covered where we were, but I got out of it and made my way towards Chinatown. And when I got to the Manhattan Bridge, I heard of people gasping on the corner, and I turned around and I watched the second tower fall. And I'll never forget it, just horrible. And I walked back to where I was living on 19th Street in Manhattan. I was staying in a community run by a priest called Father Richard John Newhouse, who had a think tank, the Institute for Religion and Public Life, and ran a magazine called First Things. And I was able to stay in the community when I arrived to New York. And I remember just calling home and talking to my mom and my sisters, and they were crying, wondering, I told them I was okay. And then I ended up back down to work for 6 days as a civilian volunteer. And it was a profound experience. I met the Lord twice, really, through two priests. One in the middle of the night. They were carrying one of the dead firefighters, and they stopped right in front of me, and in front of a guy dressed like a construction worker, but he was actually a priest, and they pulled back the body bag, and this priest pulled out, the holy water, and he prayed for the man's soul, and the firefighters were crying. And, I'll never forget it. It's like a memory that's, that is very strong for me. And then they covered him up, and they took him to the morgue, and we just continued working. But there was Christ right in the middle of the chaos and the destruction. And then a few days later, I saw a sign that said R.I.P. Father Mike, Father Michael Judge, the Franciscan firefighter chaplain who died when the towers fell. And it reminded me that it was Sunday, and I went and found a priest, and I asked him, I said, Father, what time is Mass? He said, you missed it, but I have the Eucharist. And so he gave me the Lord right there, and it was like a volunteer center. And I hadn't been able to sleep much when I was there. I was working kind of around the clock, emergencies, and I had nightmares. And when he left, I just started to feel, like the emotion of those days. And I went and took a nap. And in this nap, I was like taking to a place in my dream. It was so beautiful and light and peaceful. And it was just like a gift from God, with the Eucharist. And when I woke, I had this desire to leave. And he said, I'm done. And I left. And at that time, they didn't suspect there would be any more survivors. And I left Ground Zero. And after that time, a friend of mine, came to me and said, you should go talk to a priest, because I was, not in a good state, and really it saved my life. I realized after that you could die any day. I knew that intellectually, but at this point it was very just very much on the forefront of my mind. You remember after 9/11 there was a scare of anthrax in the city.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I had what turned out to be a zit, but it was on my head. It was a sore, and I was a little paranoid. I thought after being down there, my lungs were full of all the junk. So I went to the hospital, and they said, no, it's just that. So, I was really thinking about death a lot, and I thought, I could die. And so I went and found a priest, and a great priest, a very holy priest. And I told him I either want to get married or become a priest. And he taught me basically how to make confession, and that saved my life. And really through confession, I just cleaned out, and the Lord cleaned me out, and I just consistently kept coming back to Him for confession. And after that, like, everything opened up. I could finally hear the Lord's voice again in my life. So.
Was it through that cleaning up that you began to hear His voice calling you to the seminary?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Initially it was kind of like coming alive, like a resurrection. I had lived very selfishly, very much for myself, and seeing the world, experiencing life, tasting what life had to offer, and was left empty. And this was like an experience of being born again, really, and like a hunger inside to want to live for something greater than myself. Like, the cliche, like John F. Kennedy, serve a higher cause, whatever. But I really felt that, deep inside. And for me, I remembered at Ground Zero, there was really the most valuable people there were priests. And because in those moments, the only thing people care about really is the ultimate things, the last things. Doctors too were very valuable in those days. People needed healing, but the idea of saving souls and having the soul saved to me was, it's the greatest thing you could do with your life. It was what I thought in those days, and so by that time I got a hunger. I was living in Father Newhouse's community, and a lot of priests would come by. And I had thought I had squandered my opportunity to become a priest. I thought, no, I had lived a worldly life. I partied. I did all that stuff. And so I had the call at once, but I squandered it. And so I felt terrible. And then I realized that God's mercy was very, very, very tender and can restore and bring back to life anybody. And He did that to me. And I started to see again the reality of priests. Are human beings, but that have just said yes and then God does the work. We don't do it; it's God's work, and so I started to open up to that question again, and started to hear His voice calling, and the desire came back.
So, what were the steps between that moment of conversion, of new life, and actually entering the seminary?
My friend was working for First Things, and he left to go pursue more education, and so a spot opened up, and I was able to take that job. So
Okay.
I worked at First Things magazine with Father Newhouse, living in that community for 2 more years. And during that time, I went into discernment, and I thought about religious life, and I just kept hearing the call to become a diocesan priest, and it was very strong. So I discerned, and the second year at First Things, I decided to live in the world as if I was like a seminarian, or as if I was pursuing a chaste life, and not date, and to spend my free time in prayer and good things, or in activities that were good for the soul, instead of the old life I used to live. And first to see, could I live a life just as a layman in the world, given over to God. And so I did that in the community there. And then at the end of that, the doors opened up very quickly to go to seminary at Dunwoody, St. Joseph Seminary, and the Archdiocese. And I was just very grateful, and God just led the way, and I came.
What year was it that you entered the seminary?
2004.
2004.
To pre-theology.
Okay, so 1 year of pre-theology at
Yeah.
the St. John Neumann residence,
Yeah,
and then 4 years of theology.
that's right.
Wow. How was the time in the seminary?
It was good. It was good. The first year was an adjustment, about just giving up freedom. But at that time, I had really had enough of living the worldly life, and so I was happy to leave that stuff behind, and then it was just really learning how to pray. I really didn't know how to pray very well until I met my spiritual director before I entered seminary, and he taught me how to pray, and so that became kind of my hunger, my desire, is to learn a life of prayer, and to receive that love of God inside, and so that became kind of my hunger at that point,
And it led to your ordination on May 9th, 2009. I know there's a wonderful video of your ordination that's available on YouTube at newyorkpriest.com, and you were ordained by Archbishop Dolan, his first ordination here in New York, isn't that right?
Yes, first class. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great. It was greatest day I could so far in my life, probably. Just beautiful. It was a beautiful day. I've got great classmates. Father Chris Argano up in Monroe at Sacred Heart, Father Anthony Mizzigilli down at Assumption, the other Assumption in the Bronx. The 2 Franciscan friars, Father Louis Leonelli, he's in St. Crispin's in the Bronx, and Father Jacob Hausman is over in England. And we just had a great class. And Archbishop Dolan was still fresh to New York and was filled with joy. He's a very joyful Archbishop. And that day, I know he loves ordinations, and it was it was an abundance of joy. I remember it very well.
And your family was there, and you got your first assignment shortly thereafter to Our Lady of Angels in the Bronx. Your first year as a priest, was it, let's say your first half a year as a priest, or any special blessings to recount during that first summer as a priest? I know for myself, my first summer as a priest was such a highlight of my life, and just so overfilled with joy. How would you describe your first summer as a priest?
Very, very similar, very similar. The first month was you kind of on a cloud, and for me, I was just going around everywhere, wanting to give blessings, wanting to offer first masses. I was like overzealous, and that probably stayed on with me for a while. I just really enjoyed. My first time was Our Lady of Angels in the Bronx, in Kingsbridge Heights. Awesome, beautiful people, wonderful assignment. Mostly
very mixed, isn't it? Or was it more Spanish?
It is. It's primarily people from the Dominican Republic, either immigrants or first generation. And for me, this was a new experience to be in a parish. I'm a white guy from the Midwest, and I just was very limited in introduction to Spanish in the seminary, and but I was welcomed with open arms, even though they were very patient with me with trying to speak Spanish. And what I never really had much of a charismatic, except for the Franciscan friars. I used to go with them sometimes, but it's a different. But the Hispanic charismatics really introduced me to a whole new way of being with the Lord, and I loved it. They taught me so much, and I loved being with them.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so great, Father Vincent. Now, I know, and all the priests of the Archdiocese are very familiar, that in your first year of a priest, you suffered tremendous losses, great tragedies. Could you tell the TV audience a little bit about what your family suffered in that first year of your priesthood?
Sure. But I was ordained in May, and then in January of the first month, my mom died suddenly back home in Carmel, Indiana. Actually, they'd moved to Noblesville, Indiana, a town to the east of Carmel, and my mom and dad were living on the same property as one of my sisters with their children. They had like a grandparents' quarters behind, and my mom was 72 and in great health, and I have to really say my mom was a saintly woman. I mean, really a tremendous, tremendous soul, and so. And she died suddenly. It appeared to be a heart attack, but it was inconclusive on the autopsy. And she had died on a Sunday, the baptism of the Lord. After her morning prayers, she prayed every morning, sometimes for an hour or two, even before leaving her bed. And so I have a lot of peace about her death, but it was a shock. And I went home and celebrated the funeral for my mom and with my family. And it was an incredible time for our family. Just an incredible grace, actually, for our family. Her death was powerful grace for the whole family. Very, very powerful. And so I had a lot of peace immediately that the Lord took her right to heaven. I think she was one of those fast trackers.
Yeah.
I don't think she probably maybe got a little dusting off in purgatory or the straight shot. So but then 2 months later, and I have a different I have a perspective on this which I'd like to share because. From an earthly perspective, it's a great tragedy. My dad and brother died suddenly in a carbon monoxide poisoning accident in the same house where my mom died 2 months later. And so that was in March, just 2 months after mom died. My brother had gone home to live with my dad for a little while to keep him company after mom died. And there was a vehicle running in the garage. It was either accidentally left on or the engine may have backfired one of the ATVs, the four-wheelers. Yeah. And they died instantly. It was an unfinished garage, so the fumes came in, and they died instantly that night. By God's grace, I happened to have been home in Indiana the previous weekend, and we had a mass for my mom, and they were both at that mass. My dad was a recovered alcoholic, and my brother was a recovered drug addict, and both of them recovered 3 or 4 years before they died. And they were at this Mass, received communion, and then the next day I offered Mass for what we call the healing of the family tree. And it was one of my mom's persistent prayers for about 5-6 years before she died. And so we offered this Mass in the front yard of my sister's place. My dad was there, my brother-in-law, and my sisters. And the graces of that Mass really, I believe, really go out into the family to heal. And they died 3 days later. I was able to hug them both goodbye, and I told them I loved them. My brother the night before I left, my dad at the airport, and I had no idea it would be the last time I'd see them.
Wow.
But from the heavenly perspective, I see really God's hand in it, in that my mom died first, and she was like a prayer warrior for like 50 years, and I know she prayed for the salvation of the souls of her family preeminently, and I believe that. Their deaths were an answer to her prayers. That is, they died in a time when they were ready to meet God, and they died a very merciful death, and they died in a very good time to die for their soul. And so I have a lot of peace also about their deaths.
Wow. That experience of tragic loss. I remember the first time I saw you after you'd suffered both these tragedies. I asked you, "How you doing, Father Vincent?" And your response was, "I feel God is flooding my soul with grace." And if I looked at your face, it was believable at that time. That must have affected the way you administer to your people, especially considering, a lot of times as priests we're called to minister to people in time of crisis and in time of death. Do you feel that it affected you in the way you now serve the bereaved in time of loss?
Yes. There was, afterward, I was never much of an emotional person, or I would be more private with my emotions. And afterward, I found myself, just being very free with my emotions. I cried a lot that year, or more than I've ever cried in my life, privately, but also very much publicly. And when I would meet somebody who lost a parent or a loved one, there was kind of an instant, I guess you would say, connection or empathy that I realized you didn't really have to say much, more just be present and to give an embrace, a hug, and presence and prayer. And that changed in me after going through that myself. And I can't explain it. It's a grace of God, but I do feel a connection with Our Lady of Sorrows, one of the titles of the Blessed Mother. And I would say she has been very close with me in this last year and a half. I feel a very strong connection with the sorrows of Our Lady, and she, more than anyone or anything, has given me consolation and given me a connection with those who are suffering.
Wonderful. Assumption Church, this parish in which you're now just beginning your ministry among us, we're so grateful to have you. You'll discover it's a very Marian parish. There's so much devotion to Our Lady under many, many different titles, from titles from Central and South America to titles we know and love in North America. And so I feel like that in itself will be a source of rich blessing for you and for us, who are so grateful to have you here with us. Father Vincent, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks. And for your beautiful message and personal testimony of your life. We look for many wonderful, fruitful years with us here in Peekskill. And I want to just tell our studio audience how grateful we are for your watching us here at Assumption Catholic Peekskill. You can visit us on our website, which is www.assumptionpeekskill.com, or you can also visit our new blog, Catholic Peekskill, at Blogspot. The addresses are there on your screen. This is Father John Higgins. We're very grateful for your watching Catholic Peekskill. We'll see you for our next episode. God bless you, everyone.